We've all been there, in the middle of a job, everything going smoothly, until boom, you're missing a part. United Refrigeration is your one-stop shop for all your refrigeration needs. Use your computer or smartphone to go to www.uri.com at any time of day or night to check stock on your favorite brands, such as Copeland, Sporlan, Carlisle compressors, Danfoss, Emerson CPC boards and sensors, Carrel, Hussmann parts, and Geo Thermal. United Refrigeration Inc. is home to these brands and many more. Looking for information on refrigerant conversions or refrigerant banking? Quick access links on the homepage can get you to the information you need. All approved accounts are able to see live to-the-minute inventory and pricing. Product not in stock at your local branch? No problem. Use the Nearby Stock feature to find a local branch that does have what you need. Are you looking for a branch address, phone number, or after-hours number? That's all available as well. Just click on the branch locator and search for your local branch. Have a model number and looking for a replacement part? www.uri.com/ARP has a vast list of quick pick replacement parts. Just search for the model number of the equipment you're working on and click the Replacement Parts tab. If you don't have an account, click the Register button and we'll have you online in no time. With more than 400 locations in North America, each United Refrigeration branch is fully stocked for immediate pickup. Our branch employees have in-depth technical knowledge, so we can help you get what you need when you need it. Visit your local store or www.uri.com/ARP today. United Refrigeration Inc. has all your solutions down cold.
John, how can you always have the right TV for the right application without carrying hundreds of valves on your truck?
You can carry the hundreds of valves on a trailer behind your truck.
That's too funny. That would work, but how are you going to do that? Maybe there's an easier way.
You can use Sporlan's interchangeable cartridge style Type Q and Type BQ TEVs. Type Q is a conventional design and Type BQ is a balanced port TEV.
Well, come on, I need easy. How easy is it?
Easy as 1, 2, 3.
And it serves thousands of unique applications. So what's the process? How do I put this together?
First, you select the thermostatic element assembly. Then you select the body that you need. Then you select the right size cartridge for the application to get the proper capacity TEV for your application. And then I guess it should also be said you want to actually assemble those into a single valve.
That'd probably be a good idea.
Indeed.
These easy to select and assemble valves mean you're always carrying the right valve for the right job then. If folks want to learn more, what do they do?
You can go to sporlan.com and find more information on the Type Q and BQ thermostatic expansion valves.
I guess that's Jim and John for Sporlan signing off.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Advanced Refrigeration Podcast. You're here with your host, Brett Wetzel and Kevin Compass. What are you doing?
How's it going? Oh, just living the dream. It's 50 degrees outside and wet and miserable.
Is it raining out there today?
Yeah, on and off all day. So just kind of prepping up condensers for condenser swaps and getting ready to do a whole nother store worth of condenser swaps.
That sounds fun.
Like,
shit.
Yeah, well, we're on like week number 5 of this, so it's starting to get like monotonous.
Oh, just doing condenser changes every single week?
Every single day for like 5 weeks.
What?
Yeah, we're doing 2 racks a day.
Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's effective as shit, but I mean, what are you using? What are you using to pump it out?
Navac NRD 4-cylinder recovery machine.
How fast is that thing?
Fast until it comes up against a headmaster.
until it what comes up against the headmaster?
Well, the last store we did were LAC headmasters. 3 of them piped in parallel per rack. The ones where you cut it and it goes from 180 to 100. What a kick in the dick. There was no ports on a discharge. So just them a drop leg. So it was
pulling through the valve. It was pulling through the discharge of the valve, which was just fucking taking forever.
Yeah, it took like an hour and a half. We were knocking racks down in 20, 25 minutes with this thing before like
And
until we got those.
And it's
So
just
there's
fucking eating liquid.
eating it, just eating it. But there's nothing at that point. There was nothing we could do. I mean, it is what it is. Like there was no ports on the condenser to pull off of. So
Did you ever? I have a question. Have you ever tried to install a hot tap?
So we were just talking about that, like on and off, like maybe I don't know. These condensers are so shot. I would be so afraid to do it.
No, I'm just saying. So like I used to do appliance work a long time ago, and
Oh yeah,
and
those.
and basically you literally weld the saddle on, okay, and then it looks almost like the carrier style of whatchamacallit, the carrier style of I can't fucking think. The carrier style of Schrader core, right? Except for it's a regular Schrader core, but the end basically has a little piercing valve in the corner of it. So I mean, it would at least get you a port on the discharge line. I don't know how big the discharge line is, how big those ones are, because I think those fittings only go up to like 7/8.
2 1/8.
Well, I guess not.
Yeah, I mean it's not really that big of a deal. I mean, these racks have such little gas on them anyway. I mean, just
Just pulling it out.
yeah, but I mean they're like all half flat anyway.
Just put the gas in the other fucking rack at this point.
Well, oh yeah, that's what we're doing tomorrow. We're just sucking them into the other rack. So, I mean, this one should go relatively smooth tomorrow. Maybe. I don't know. I shot one of the ball valve caps up like 20 feet in the air when I went to go take it off. A little bit more pressure there than I thought. I thought it would kind of stop. It did not.
Did that say 20? No, it said 200.
Replaced because we pre-pipe all these condensers. I have fitters pre-piping them in a warehouse, and we pull vacuums on them. We put gas in them and send them out. They already have ball valves on them. So the condensers all have ball valves. We spend the money to put ball valves on each side of the condenser. So if you really need to shut anything down, it's all right there. Makes life a whole lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. Well, they did. And you said these were the condensers that were totally clapped to shit, right?
Oh, these ones?
Yeah.
This thing was begging for a sprinkler at 50 today. Begging.
What?
It running 295 pounds a head. Begging for a sprinkler. There was 6 sprinklers underneath 3 condensers at this store. There's 5 total. They had a booster pump on the roof. A booster pump.
Just to get the flow.
I came to the site in the summertime, and it was hilarious because I looked at them, and some of the guys that were working on the store, it wasn't us. It was I'm not going to say who, but they switched the normally open split valves to normally closed valves and never rewired the old Comtrol boards.
Oh no!
And
you have to tell the program that it's inverted. You can't just there's no dippy switches to change the failsafe.
You could wire normally open, normally closed, but like they did not do any of that. And in the middle of summer, it was de-energized, and it would not open the split side of the condenser. I found 3 condensers like that. Just sprinklers all underneath them. As soon as I did that, the head just like shot down. But these things are so clapped now from calcium.
Just from water being on it for the past 15 years. Oh, man.
So tonight I wanted to talk about geothermal stuff, geothermal racks and heat recovery, which we see it quite a bit, and we're starting to see it. Yeah. Hey, we have a couple HE heat recovery Walmarts up here.
Okay.
Some of them are better than others.
I'm just gonna play dumb.
So what geothermal is? There's a couple of different ways of doing this. There's heat recovery stores and there's geothermal. So geothermal would be you're using ground loop water to cool and heat the store simultaneously.
Hold on. Are they using it just for actual like conditioning, or are they using it for a condenser water?
So it would be in the summertime, it would be condenser water.
Uh-huh.
In the wintertime, it would be your heat source.
And condensing loop then, right?
So
You could actually bypass it, right? You could bypass one water to another.
yes. So what these do typically is you'll have a water cooled rack, some plate and frame heat exchangers, some braze plate. Hopefully they're plate and frames. You can take them apart, but usually they're braze plate heat exchangers. And what they're doing is in the wintertime, the racks are actually returning the heat back to the store. So generally everything in the store is heat pumps. So you have little mini heat pumps everywhere, or you have a couple large heat pump rooftop units. And what they're actually doing is taking the condenser water from the racks after it leaves the condenser, and they pump it through the heat pumps. The heat pumps then pull the heat back out of that water, and they're cooling it down and taking the heat out and rejecting it back in the store. So you're essentially not really losing any. You're not using any gas, and your racks are still heating the store, but you're also running a colder, more controlled condenser temperature, because that condenser water is controlled with a bypass valve. Whether it goes down the Geo loop downstairs, it could be 50, 60 degree water, downstairs all the time in the ground loops, or a pond, or however they do it. And there'll be a bunch of wells usually drilled that they're pumping the water through. And then this is all closed loop. So then it flows back into the racks and then cools the rack condensers back down.
So let me just get this straight. So we have a loop that goes down into the ground, because the ground temperature is always going to be either above what it is outside or below what it is outside, right? So you might get about 60 degree, 55 degree water out of that, right? And so you're telling me that we use that for condensing water all year round, right? Which would bring the pressure and temperature down in all your heat pumps and all your rack stuff. And then in the wintertime, they would basically shut off the loop that goes down into the ground, because they don't really need it at that point, because then you have the cold water coming from the heat rejection of the heat pumps, and then you have the hot heat coming from the rack. So it's basically a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't essentially shut it off. It would be usually it's a three-way mixing valve.
So, all right, so it's not complete shut off. It's just tempering it, trying to maintain. Okay, gotcha.
So it's tempering it to try to maintain, some temperature, whether it needs to warm it up or whether it needs to cool it down. So generally, like on a properly set up store where it isn't like, when it gets down to minus 15, it's probably not going to be able to supply all the supplemental heat. The racks aren't, but I mean, that is your main heat source. Say if the racks go down, it's going to open up the water loop and it's going to start pulling that water from down into the ground. It's going to allow it to heat. Go ahead, Brett.
You must be talking about it. I mean, that's got to be like a 6 or an 8-inch fucking line, if there's that many racks on there. Yeah.
It depends. Like some of them are 8 or 10-inch condenser water lines. It just really depends on how large it is and how much flow it is. Like we have one of the Walmart stores up here. It was one of the very first CO2 glycol stores. It has 38 rooftops on it that are water cooled. So
wow,
it's got a decent load. Now, and mind you, the refrigeration isn't able to do all the store, but it puts a decent amount. There's still a boiler there, and this is air heat pumps basically. So they're basically pulling. They're using the towers to pull the water loop down, and then they have a boiler for supplemental heat that's heating the water loop to keep it at like 50 degrees.
I've seen some situations kind of like that, not to that extent, but basically where they what up in I think it was up in New York, where they basically had a condensing water loop that went to a secondary condensing water loop. Sorry about that. And then basically what it would do is the set point was like 55 degrees. So even like in the wintertime and the cooler times in New York, when the temperature would get down, if the water loop actually got down to 55 degrees, it would then move this big ass 3-way globe valve that would switch the flow from the condensing loop to the chilled water loop. And then it would also, I programmed disable for the chiller. So basically, if the water loop was already getting down to 50, 55 degrees where it needed to be anyway, it would just shut off the fucking chiller, stop the flow going into the chiller, and then use the secondary condensing loop to go to, out to the cold water loop. And then you don't have to use any mechanical cooling.
Yeah, I mean it's essentially the same thing basically, except this is just one continuous loop around the building, and you have heat pumps drawing off of it. And generally, the heat pumps will pull enough off of the water loop where they don't need to bring on the cooling tower in the wintertime. So you lose that cooling tower in the wintertime most of the time because those heat pumps are drawing enough heat out of the condenser loops where it's going to be okay. And then like this Walmart store uses the Munters units. It uses a pre-cool coil or preheat coil to basically that entering air from the outside air has these giant slab coils that it's cooling down that water before or that glycol before it hits the racks. We've had a lot of problems with the store because we've had this particular store has no boiler. This one I'm talking about right now has no boiler. It's just the rack. If the Munters units are running the pre-cool coils or the preheat coils and it's below like 10 degrees, it'll drop the water loop down to like 30 degrees.
You won't get enough heat to it.
Because it's basically like having 3 ginormous dry coolers at that point.
Oh shit!
Because they just pull all the heat out of it, and then there's 60 tons of
Veriflow.
No, there's 60 tons of heat pump in that unit too that are pulling it out. So, I mean, they're almost as much load as the rack.
Oh shit! So that's wow.
So generally, we have to shut those things down. We have to shut the heat pumps down in the wintertime for those, and then they just run off gas heat. But like on a normal store where you have enough load in like a smaller store, so we took care of it was like a Stop and Shop type of store, like in the middle of nowhere. It was Geo Thermal, had 3 Hussmann Geo Thermal racks, water loop around the store.
Yeah.
They had like 22 like 5 and 10 ton water source heat pumps.
Mm-hmm.
The thing ran great. Like after we got it tuned out, like it ran great. Like they ran like 155 to 175 pounds of head all year round in the middle of summer. Because you got to remember when it's 95 degrees outside, that groundwater is still like 65, 70 degrees.
Yeah.
So here's where you benefit even more. In the middle of summertime, now you have 60, 65 degree water entering these condenser loops, and you're getting that 65 degree water. So you say you're running a 70, 75 degree condensing temperature all year round. Now you're benefiting all year round from that low head pressure, but you're not losing any horsepower on fans to get it because you're going through that geo loop. You only have a pump.
Well, it's almost like theoretically, it's almost like having a liquid pressure regulating valve all the time, right? Because then you're maintaining the same saturated condensing temperature all year round, which would stop, unnecessary expansion valve adjustments as well, right? Because you're running the same fucking temperature all the time, you're running the same pressure all the time. So then that means that valve, because you've heard old timers say, "Oh, it just needs a seasonal adjustment." No, it does kind of, only because now the expansion valve is a different size based off of, in the summertime running 390 head versus running 160 in the wintertime.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then the other baseline to that is you have like super steady liquid levels because you're not like going from 50 degrees outside to 70 to 90 degrees outside or 20 degrees outside. Your liquid level is just constant all the time because as long as your load is constant, because you have constant water temperature entering this rack.
That's the same. Well, it's the same with the expansion valves too, right? Because if you have the same liquid temperature all the time and the same liquid pressure all the time, that means that valve's just going to have to go up and down like that. It's not going to have to, that's why, like, if you adjust the store, like, I tell guys all the time, like, if you adjust the store with a liquid pressure regulating valve, it takes longer to watch that adjustment actually finally set as than if it was a regular store where where the pressure is going up and down with the condensing fan motors and stuff, right? Because it's so steady.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, geothermal, if it's properly set up and the ground loops are properly sized, then I mean it kicks ass. Like the issues I've seen though is with stores not having ground loop sized properly. So
where you don't have enough water to support the actual because your racks creating heat, but
so you get enough water flow, like because that's all based on the piping and the wells. but like enough heat rejection from the wells.
Yeah.
So if you don't,
There's circuit setters on there though too, right? To make sure you have the right GPM going across, or is that all sized with the pumps? Because some people do the engineering different, right? Like some people will engineer it where the exact fucking pipe size that's there is exactly sized for this, as long as we keep this differential. Where most of the shit that we deal with all has circuit setters on there, because the load is going to change, obviously. On if you have a rack that's glycol, right? You have fucking how many circuits that are going to satisfy, which is going to cut down your the amount of circuits, right? Which is going to cause more of a differential, which is going to cause things to run differently as far as GPM. Hence why we have the circuit setters on those big fucking heat exchangers in those racks.
so I've seen it both ways, but these geo loops most of the time, so they're usually like the load is steady, meaning like there's usually not a three-way valve on the racks. So it's usually in and out. There's usually no head pressure control. Your head pressure control is the geo loop.
No, I'm talking on the geo loop itself to make sure like the amount of flow, because you got to remember, we need the refrigerant to flow a certain way, yes, but we also need the fucking water to flow.
Is like the geo loop itself, generally doesn't have any bypass valves on it, so it's usually a constant flow through the design flow through the system. Meaning, like if they designed it to have 109 GPM,
it's got size the piping. Okay.
Yeah, because there's no valve shutting off on it.
Okay. Because I see what you're saying.
Just a three-way valve on the loop going down to the geo wells would be your only actuator. That's what you're using to control your temp.
Gotcha.
So your actual like pump GPM is going to be constant because your loads are all constant. There's no changing of that. But yes, I've seen it both ways. I've seen it with circuit setters, and I've seen them just using VFDs on pumps to control pump differential. Now, what I was talking about though was like not having enough well, meaning like the wells don't reject enough heat, or they're not deep enough, or they're not big enough, or there's like the aquifer that they're in isn't sufficient enough to reject the heat. So we've had that problem, and that's become kind of a nightmare with this. Like we had a store where they had to add a cooling tower to it. They had to add a dry cooler to it because they couldn't maintain in the middle of summer. It was the aquifer was too small, and there wasn't enough wells, and they had to add a cooling tower to it.
That would be interesting. Like, how do you actually, like, now I'm curious, like, how would you actually like, how do you know how much fucking water is in there and how much? Hey guys, today's episode is sponsored by Westermeyer Industries Serviceable Oil Floats. Many oil separators contain an oil float to effectively meter separated oil back to the compressors. Westermeyer Industries has taken this concept and perfected it with their new line of serviceable oil floats. These floats feature an improved design with fewer components, allowing for greater manufacturer consistency and up to 20% increased oil flow versus their legacy models. These floats also feature an integrated magnet to shield the oil path from debris and have been field proven in supermarket applications. Westermeyer Industries offer replacement oil floats not only for their own separators, but also cross-compatible models for our competitor oil separators as well. You can find out more about the Westermeyer Industries serviceable oil floats by visiting westermeyerind.com/floats. Once again, that's westermeyerind.com/float. Let's get on with the episode. How much area of water there is, and that would equate to how many, you know what I mean? They'd have to figure out exactly how much water was in there.
It's like a guessing game with the geo company. So like the refrigeration contractor never has anything to do with that. That's always the geo company.
Yeah.
That does, like, I mean, a lot of those geo companies don't do a lot of like large commercial stuff. You got to remember. So like a lot of it's smaller residential geo companies doing this stuff because I mean, my parents have geo at their house and it's awesome. Like it does everything, the pool heat, everything. Now, like they have, like there's like 9 wells there to keep that, like 9 wells in a house. So you can only imagine probably what a grocery store would need. I mean, it would have to be tremendous. And like my whole thing with that is like, I like the technology, but what if the aquifer dries up?
Looks like we're going to be putting glycol in there with a chiller on the roof.
Yeah, I mean, so like there's that, but there's also different types of geo. Like you could have lake water geo, like which
Mhm.
is you have like the tubes in the lake, and you're using lake water geo like that. That works out really well. I mean, but obviously in the middle of summer, that lake water can get up to 80 degrees, 90 degrees. So I mean that's a little bit less efficient, but like obviously you can monitor it a little bit better, and you always have water on top of it. So there's that type of geo. Now I have seen systems where they have Geo and they also have a backup cooling tower, like that one we're talking about. Like they have a backup cooling tower, a dry cooler, like a 10 fan condenser that they could switch to if there's an issue. So if they have an issue, like say the Geo loop goes down, there's an issue with like say there's a leak, they could isolate a Geo loop and switch to a dry cooler, which would be like just like a 10, 12 fan condenser that they're using, and they have glycol going through it instead of refrigerant. So that aids in rejecting the heat from the Geo loop. Now, in the middle of summer, these things get pretty loaded up because you got to remember now all the rooftops and heat pumps are rejecting heat into this. It turns into a just straight condenser loop. So it's just one big condenser loop for the entire store rejecting heat into this. So I mean that's where your load issue comes in. And if you don't have like good flow and then everything else, it's going to be an issue. The other issue is I've seen a lot of problems when guys add water to this stuff and they start scaling it up and sliming it up. Like this store we had in the middle of nowhere, like these Hussman racks, they were cleaning the condensers. Like they were acid cleaning them. Like, man, it was like once a month. Like they were having to clean them because they had lost the glycol charge, and obviously we had to get this back going. So somebody added straight city water to it, or well water to it, and it was just nasty. Like this was bad well water. So it ended up reacting to the glycol, and it ended up sludging up the system, and it was affecting the heat exchangers. Like they would just you would stop transferring heat, and the Geo company would come in there, they would flush it, back flush it, and then be good. But like that store constantly had problems ever since they did that. They ended up putting a bunch of mag filters in to try to get all the iron out of it. But I mean, I'm real standoffish about putting city water and stuff. I understand if you lose a lot of water, I mean it is what it is. But nothing ever good.
Distilled water.
Yeah, but when you need hundreds of gallons of distilled water, you aren't getting it.
Distilled water.
We have one of those Walmart stores. They had a makeup water valve on there that nobody knew about in the pump house, buried, and they had a rooftop leak, and there was a pre-cool coil, and it was leaking, and it was going down the drain pan. Well, this particular store, the drains are piped inside the building. Nobody knew. It was leaking for God knows how long. Nobody knew.
Wow.
Because it was draining into the building into a main rooftop drain, and nobody ever saw it. Never made a drop in an aisle. Nobody ever saw it. But came wintertime, we hit like -10, -15.
Yeah.
The rack shut off for a little bit, and next thing you know, the cooling towers froze.
Oh no.
So, I mean, we and it was like -10. So we spent, I think it was like 8 hours trying to get this thing back going. We had to tarp the cooling towers with tarps, and we had like 4 or 5 of the propane heaters in there, like buddy heaters in there, trying to warm them up to get flow again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. If you're going to do this stuff, have a water treatment guy. Even though it's a closed loop, you should still be checking it.
Absolutely. Any kind of usually closed loop usually has some means of checking and adding chemicals to water for most of the part. There'll be a canister that usually has isolation valves, and basically it's used to just put in any kind of treatment that you need to for that water.
Yeah, I mean, hire a good water treatment guy. I'm a refrigeration guy. I don't know shit about that. I mean, obviously Brett does a little bit because he did it for a while. But I mean, water treatment is a science in itself. I mean, hire a good water treatment guy. They're worth their weight in gold, especially with cooling towers and dry coolers and other stuff like that. It could save you thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages.
Oh, there. I've seen towers where the guy was telling me the company before we got it. They were like, yeah, we just changed out the bundle in there. I'm like, whoa, wait, why? He's like, yeah, we were coming up with about 3 or 4 leaks every week, and we just couldn't keep up with. Because basically, what happens is whenever you get that calcium like over the pipes, when you trap oxygen, oxygen oxidizes, so it basically has a chemical reaction and then eats through the pipe because of the oxygen that's there. That's why when they do chemical treatment, they usually try to keep a little bit of hardness on the pipes, not a lot, not that you can actually feel it. But that's why they don't bring the hardness all the way down to zero. They keep it at certain parts per million just to keep that material in there.
Yeah, we had a guy, the new water treatment company, come into one store, and he descaled the tower.
Hmm.
It was smoking a lot. Then all the scale came off, and we were scooping it out in buckets.
And then start
And
leaking.
then 3 days later, it started leaking like a stuffed pig. Like it was just like joints all over. I'm like, oh, this sucks. I called this.
And it's not even, and it doesn't even have to be on the joints. Like it'll be on like a straight piece of
Yep.
fucking pipe in the middle of the fucking bundle.
I despise cooling towers like that. Like I do. Like I hate it. Because I mean, okay, they're nasty, they're disgusting, they get scaled up, and customers don't take care of them properly because it gets overlooked. I mean, water treatment gets overlooked. I mean, it just does, and they're a nightmare to fix. They're extremely expensive to maintain. I mean, you're better off putting air cooled condensers in, unless you're in the middle of like Arizona or something.
Arizona high or California high desert.
Yeah, I mean, we've been replacing them. We just did a store. We did 3 12-fan condensers
Yeah.
to take out the cooling tower. One rack had 2 12-fan condensers. I mean, I'd much rather have that than the cooling tower.
Hey, when we have that Gutner guy on, we're gonna ask him about the chemical treatment because I'm curious what they actually recommend.
Yeah. With that being said, guys, like there's also like air heat pumps. So an air heat pump is basically you're using the air to draw out the heat of the spun up here. They're using the condenser in the middle of the wintertime to draw your heat for your compressor. So you basically your evaporator it turns into your condenser turns into your evaporator, and your evaporator turns into your condenser. So they flip flop. So you're essentially drawing heat out of the air. So an air heat pump would essentially be drawing heat out of the air and then rejecting it through the evaporator coil through a 3-way valve.
I'm
Or I'm
surprised.
sorry,
I'm surprised they use that in your area. Like
what
I'm really surprised that they use heat
actually
pumps in
like
your area.
it's actually like super common. Like we have a bunch of stores where they're heat pumps, and then they obviously have backup gas heat. But like, I mean, heat pumps are like fairly common. Like my in-laws have like a 26 or a 23 SEER heat pump like setup. Like they didn't go into emergency heat till it got down to -15, which is their gas. Like they ran the heat pump all the way down to like -5, -10.
There's not much heat in the air when it's at fucking zero.
There's not, but like I mean, some of these heat pumps are so efficient now that like they're actually like getting down that low. Like they're even like the cheaper heat pumps, they're advertising like they'll heat a house up down to 0.
I don't believe it.
I mean, I don't know. Like I mean, I've been seeing a ton of heat pump rooftops here lately. Like Linux has been pumping them out like crazy.
Really?
Same with Aeon, like a ton of heat pump rooftops. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's pretty they're efficient, and we have a lot of buildings downtown where they're on water loops, so we see a ton of heat pumps. Like we probably have like 15 or 20 targets downtown that are all heat pumps.
Hmm.
They're using but they're on a water loop where it's like 50, 60 degrees, all the time, and the building is making out like a bandit because the racks are heating it instead of the boilers. Like we had Aldi store where they put the rack protocol in. It's bigger protocol. They dropped out a boiler and a half with just the protocol running. This is a 22-story high rise.
Damn.
And they dropped out a boiler and a half from this rack. because they keep the water at 55 degrees all year round
Mm-hmm.
for the heat pumps. For well, it gets up higher than that because when it's on the dry coolers, but like in the summertime. But like, yeah, they were dropping out a boiler and a half just for the fact that that rack was putting that many BTUs inside the water loop.
Because that's only like, I mean, if depending on how big the rack is, I mean, typically medium type rack, depending on what size store, is like a quarter million typically.
Yeah, I mean it's an Aldi, so it's 8 circuits. I mean it was a bunch of KF25s for the medium temp, probably 4 medium temp compressors, 2 or 3 low temps. So I mean it's a decent load on it, but like I mean it's only maintaining 55 degrees and it's putting a decent amount of heat in there.
Hmm.
I mean, so that's where like this Geo stuff like actually like comes in. Like I mean it's 100% heat recovery. You're recovering all that heat you're putting in the store. So instead of using all that gas or uh, backup heat, they're putting it in there. And then the other benefit is there's no heat reclaim coils generally, so there's less likely to have a heat reclaim coil leak. Like a lot of them, we use the condenser water coil. We use a coil inside the makeup air unit or the air handler. We use the loop water to reheat the air for dehumidification.
Okay.
So say you maybe get like 50, 60 degrees or like it's like 50, 60 degrees in the wintertime, but like say it's like 80, 90 degrees in the summertime, you're blowing 50-degree cold air. You're doing two things. You're reducing the you're cooling down the loop because you're
Mhm.
cooling the coil down, and then you're reheating that air. You don't get a ton of heat out of it like you would a 190-degree coil, but you're getting that out of there, and then you're reducing the logging of refrigerant in there, and you have less likely to have leaks because now that gas is in the mechanical room and it's glycol in there instead of refrigerant.
Did Chicago start talking yet about stop running gas in new buildings? New York just passed something for this year, I think, where
No.
they can't put any new gas lines in any new buildings. Everything has to be electric in a building from here on out, which is going to work wonders for their grid. I guess.
Yeah, it's so dumb. Yeah, I think California did the same thing.
That I wasn't aware of. I heard about the New York thing. That was just recent.
California did the same thing. But I mean, look at that VRF stuff. Like, I mean, those things are everywhere in Chicago.
Yeah.
Like there are VRF systems which are basically harder to work on protocols. Like it's all they are. I mean, it's basically a refrigeration rack with a loop and evaporators and three-way valves, and it's just less, service friendly.
I'm gonna try to make a VRF out of a rack. That's what I'm gonna do.
I'm sure you could, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, why not?
I mean,
Absolutely.
you could. It's just less serviceable. I mean, they're everywhere. Like they're all over all these buildings, but like all these buildings still have boiler heat and everything else. And like we have a lot of centralized plants too. Like Chicago has like centralized boiler plants all over the place. Like, so if a building doesn't have a boiler or a chiller, I mean, they could be getting water from the centralized plants and they could be pumping it in the building. So, I mean, there's in which New York, I'm sure, has steam plants everywhere.
I was in San Antonio, or no, fuck, I don't remember where I was, but I was somewhere down south. But anyway, so they had city steam that they were using for to convert energy for a couple different things that they were doing down in the basement, because it was in the store I was in was basically in a mall, so it shared common other stores with it. But I mean, they basically use the community steam that's ran by the city, and then use it for whatever they need, whether it be a steam to closed loop water for heat or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's really common in like bigger stuff, like bigger cities and stuff. Like there's massive chill water plants all over Chicago. There's like 6 of them, like massive, like pumps and stuff that you can't even comprehend how big they are. Like they're
They're bigger than you.
oh, they're
They're 6 foot fucking tall.
They're taller, like massive motors and like starters, and I mean they're just massive cooling plants that, like, I mean they rent, chilled water to the buildings.
Oh, what is that called when they use them for? They're called a certain type of plant where basically they're trading off like actually cooling water, but then they're also generating power too. The fuck is that called? Oh, I took a class on
it. Must not have been that good of a class.
It was a class. It was a good class. It was just a very long time ago. Cogen. Cogen plant.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is.
All right, well then maybe that's not what they have in Chicago.
No, I have no idea. I just know that we used to take care of like a CVS, and there was one on top of the CVS, and one day a butterfly valve opened in the ceiling that wasn't capped off, that nobody knew where the BLEMO came from or what, and I just watched it flood out the entire city street.
Wait a minute, let me roll you back there. Why the fuck did you laugh at me when I said I went to a class on it?
All right, guys, I think we're gonna call it. It's it for Geo Racks, and have a nice night.
Later, guys.